Fine. So next, we're going to move on to introduce our panelists. So today we have four amazing scholars here to discuss being productive over the summer. So first we have Dr. Christy Bird. She is an associate professor at North Carolina State University in the Teacher Education and Learning Sciences Department. Dr. Bird's research examines how students make sense of race and culture in their school environments. She does use quantitative and qualitative methods to explore topics such as racial discrimination, multicultural education, and culturally relevant teaching. So one area of her research focuses on adolescents' perceptions of school climate for diversity, which includes intergroup interactions and school ethnic racial socialization, in addition to how perceptions are shaped by identity development and contextual factors. So her work has shown that when youth experience their schools as positive, identity-affirming spaces, they are more academically engaged and successful. So that's our first panelist, Dr. Bird. Next, we're going to move on to Dr. Melissa Duffy. She is an assistant professor in the Educational Psychology and Research Program at the University of South Carolina. She received her PhD in Learning Sciences from McGill University. Her program of research focuses on the role of motivation and emotion in learning and performance across a variety of educational and professional domains, including medical education. Her research has examined how emotional states relate to cognitive processes and performance during medical simulation training, the impact of achievement goals within intelligent tutoring systems, and relations between teacher beliefs and instructional practices in classroom settings. More recently, her work has explored how college students respond to and navigate academic challenges. She has published work in top-tier journals in the field, including the Journal of Educational Psychology, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with, Educational Researcher, Learning and Instruction, and Computers and Human Behavior. And that's Dr. Melissa Duffy. Next, we have Dr. Sharon Zumbrun. And I apologize if I actually butchered that, Dr. Zumbrun. She is a professor of educational psychology and the director of the Motivation and Context Research Lab at Virginia Commonwealth University. In addition to her book, Why Aren't You Writing? Research, Real Talk, Strategies, and Shenanigans, she has published several research articles on the writing context, writing self-efficacy, and writing attitudes, perceptions of feedback, and lastly, writing strategies. Importantly, she self-identifies as a struggling writer, depending on the day. I can definitely get with that, and I would love to hear more about that as well. And then lastly, we have Joey Eisman, who is a doctoral candidate at Temple University studying educational psychology and is a professional educator and educational consultant. His research explores the role of emotion, in motivation, identity, and creativity, primarily using a complex dynamic systems approach. Joey recently has focused on teacher emotions and teacher empathy. He also loves staying organized and being productive, especially in the summer. So perfect, that sets us up great. So those are all of our panelists for today's session. And then, as you can see, we did have some links that were dropped into the chat, just some recent publications or accomplishments from our panelists. So next, I'm actually going to go over just the structure for today. And please keep in mind that we're always very flexible with these meetings. So yes, there's a structure, but we'll loosely follow that if we need to. So our discussion today will follow three sections. So we're going to have a discussion with our panelists. We will also have an opportunity for you all to get any questions that you would like to have answered. So please feel free to drop those in the chat as we're going through the session. And then we typically do have some type of interactive activity, but for today, we're not going to do that. Those are usually optional depending on the meetings. So next, I think we'll move into the questions. So does anybody on the panel have questions so far regarding the structure or anything like that before we move on to the specific questions for this section? All right. So as I said, please feel free to, interject. We did talk a little bit about the structure prior to the meeting. What we'll do is we'll just start with someone and then we can maybe continue to follow that structure of answering the questions with the panelists as we go. But once again, please feel free to interject. So the first question that we have is, how has your use of summertime evolved or changed over the years? So whoever would like to go first, and I'm very used to calling on people from my teacher background. So if I will, I will do that, but please feel free to go first if you want to. And we will be dropping those questions in the chat as we go as well.
Well, I guess I can start. So for me, it hasn't changed that much. Summer has always been a time of focusing more on my research than my teaching. I'm the kind of person who like spends so much time on teaching that research can kind of fall by the wayside. And so during the summer, it's a really good time to say like, okay, I'm going to work on these papers. I will, develop these projects more. I think one thing that has changed is now I'm funded for summer. So when you get grants, you can get summer salary. And so then people are actually paying you to do research over the summer. So that's definitely one thing that has evolved.
Thank you, Dr. Bird.
I can
Go
jump in
ahead.
to echo that. I think, you're always pulled kind of during the year for teaching and service. And I agree that research sometimes does fall by the wayside. So summer has always been about research, manuscripts, writing. I think one thing for me that has evolved over the years from like grad student to a faculty member has been thinking more about work-life balance, and also just taking a inventory or assessment to see what has been energizing during the year and what has maybe been more draining, so that I can be a bit more strategic going into the next year. Because I think every year you realize like some things are working, some things are not, and taking that time to kind of take stock of what do I want to accomplish in the next year. I think those are kind of the two key areas, like thinking what are not just my work goals this summer, but what are my personal goals? And then what should I be saying yes to? And what do I need to maybe start saying no to? And that's changed because I think early on I was probably just saying yes to everything that came through the door.
I really appreciate that, Dr. Duffy. And I will also add, you touched on something really important. So balancing that work and that relaxation. I would like for you to hold on to that. We're going to touch on that through our questions as well. And then whoever would like to go next.
Sure, thanks. Thanks to be Dr. Eisman. I just kind of want to retweet all that's been said so far, that I just very much agree. And especially thinking it is always always has been a time of research and writing. And I think about it more along the lines of a quote unquote more balanced approach in thinking. I like the idea of like taking stock of what are the projects and which ones do I want to prioritize. And I think about what feels missing now that the academic term has kind of waned a bit. So what do I feel is missing from my well-being or my wholeness, if you will, to think through, like maybe it's a creative project or time with specific people, or specific things that I'm missing from that make up my whole being and happiness. That's kind of how I get around using that tricky word balance, but thinking like, what am I missing from being like really joyful right now and making space for that.
I was going to say, I apologize. I was going to say, I just really appreciate that positive outlook on things. And I think we can all do a little bit more of that. And then, yes, Joey.
I'm really appreciative of the perspectives that have been given so far. I want to just stamp all of them, especially coming from the graduate student perspective. I'm not good at the work-life balance part, and this is great to hear, especially with this question about evolution. So I've spent over a decade in experiential education, working in camp settings and also teen travel programs. So my summers were always busy. The challenge now for me, what's really evolved, is going from a really well-organized structure at a camp or a travel program to then having to stay busy, but having no structure. So the thing that's really changed over the year is I have to make my own structure. I have to make my own plan. And the thing I've learned in that process is I make a plan and I allow it to change. Planning is an iterative process. So even finding that one way of processing the things I need to plan, or the plan that I've made needs to then I need to then allow myself the flexibility to iterate on top of that. So that's been a really big thing for me, is creating structure and then allowing that structure to then go out the window to make new structure.
Once again, guys, this is such great advice. I'm so glad that we're actually recording this. This will be one, I'm not taking diligent notes like I usually do, but this will be one I definitely have to rewatch because this is such great advice. So anybody else want to add anything on that question? So how have things evolved or changed prior to us moving on to the next one? And
Well,
I think we're, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add that what Joey was talking about is I do think that has changed for me. Like, oh, I'm going to write so much. And I've had to really think through, like, what's that going to look like? And mapping out the projects and those, what I call me goals that to my actual calendar, because I have a terrible habit of, or just not terribly skilled in really estimating how long things are going to take. And I have big eyes for like what I want to get done. And then all of a sudden I have Santa's list of goals, and then I'm full of guilt the rest of at the end of the term about all the things that I didn't get done. It was really not terribly realistic to begin with. And so really thinking through how it would map out on a week-to-week basis, going back to that structure has been helpful, mostly for managing guilt for me personally.
And I really appreciate that too, because I'm someone who's, if you guys could see the sticky notes on my desktop right now, but we won't get into that. It's ridiculous though. But going back to kind of what Dr. Duffy was touching on, so how do you all find the balance between work and relaxation in the summer? So, what steps do you take to make your summer productive? What steps do you take to make it recharging? And how do you find that balance?
Okay,
And then maybe we can come back to you, Dr. Bird. Okay.
yeah. So I think what Dr. Zumbrun said about being realistic with your goals is really important for making it not just feeling guilty, but also actually being productive, because it can get overwhelming to say like, oh, I had all these plans, I'm gonna work on 5 different papers. And you also want to like relax and like travel and do things like that. So being productive is really about setting goals. For me, it's about setting goals and thinking about what can I actually accomplish in the time that I have. I don't think that I sort of schedule things as closely as I probably should, but I think it's really useful to be able to say like, okay, well, here's 2 major projects. Actually, this summer I have 2 major projects that I'm going to work on. And it's also very nice to sort of have other people working with me on those projects, because then they can help me keep on track and say like, hey, wait, we were planning to do this. Like, when are we going to have that meeting? Like, oh, yes. Okay, I'll schedule that now. So those are some tips that have been helpful for me.
Do you want to go in the same sequence?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
sure.
totally to you all, but yes, if that would
Yeah.
be easier, we can go just in the same order.
So I think for me, it's setting those personal goals, and whether that's, I think one thing that's actually helpful is planning some trips or travel, something you want to do personally, and having that be a goal. So kind of having those set up for the summer too. I think for me, it also helps me commit and just keeps me a little accountable that I'm going to balance things out a little bit more. As Shay probably knows, because I usually mention this to students too, I usually take time in July to visit family. I'm from Canada originally, so it's kind of a long trip back there. And so that really motivates me to kind of use May and June as prioritizing some of the work, and then letting people know I'm going to be taking time off in July. So I think also being clear about when you're away and when you're, actually not available through email, or you're taking some time off. And I find that's helpful to just kind of communicate early on, because I will always feel a sense of, oh, I should jump in, or, oh, I can be available, and you can still have that flexibility. I like that idea, like building the structure and then, tearing it back down, adapting it as you need. But for me, I think scheduling time that you're going to take vacation, trips that you want to do that for you personally, you're going to be recharging. And then also having those realistic projects or papers you want to accomplish in the summer. So I think it's helpful for me to think I want to finish these things up and I want to start something new. And you know, we might kind of dive into that balance too, but I think those are some ways. I also think just doing, aside from like kind of more major, you know, trips or time off, having something that is, and some of those trips don't have to be major. It could just be like a little road trip or something like that. I feel like that is for me recharging and kind of gets me out of my head space of just work. But also trying to find time in the summer to build in more balance on a daily basis, because I think that's something that probably as academics struggle with throughout the year and grad students too. So I think if there's a time to do it, summer is a great time to kind of build that habit. So just having that, you know, daily thing you do for yourself, you know, mentally, physically, that isn't work related, and trying to do that. For me, it was walking during the pandemic. And then I just kind of kept that up. And then through the academic year, just made sure I was doing that where I was unplugged and kind of kept that going. So I would say have those trips, but also build in the daily sort of balance too.
Yeah,
Thank
that really,
you.
sorry, Jane. I was just going to say that that really resonates with me. And like front loading, like if I'm planning out the weeks of summer and then really ensuring that I know when am I going to be traveling and building in kind of proper holiday, even if it's like a staycation that was noted in the chat. That's like, this is my proper holiday where I am going to give my laptop to my neighbor kind of thing. And I'm like, not going to worry about that, but also really thinking about I really love the part about, you know, kind of revisiting the habits that might have fell by the wayside a bit during the academic term. And so for some folks, a lot of folks, writing is often one of those habits that could use some revisiting, myself included. So to really build in, I think like the summer is nice to play a better, for some folks at least, easier to play around with circadian rhythms. Like when does your body want to write? For some folks, it's 1 a.m. and I think that's fascinating. And for some folks, like myself, it's first thing in the morning. And so when building in the habit of like trying to make it at the same time every day, and you know, what I call, you know, going back to building the rituals to help make the habit more secure. That for me has helped, because then I can plan the rest of my day. So my kids go to swim team in the afternoon at our pool. And so best believe it's me with the shades and the lounger over while the kids are, I've got my writing done and you can catch me over here getting some much needed sun. So things like that, making time every day. So I try to be as organized as possible, and that only works so well. So being flexible with that, but I really like building in daily time for what I stopped using the word productivity at least as much, and move to the word progress. Like, what am I like doing to like push the ball down the road, really making progress, and thinking about that on a weekly basis with the projects that I've identified for the summer.
And thank you so
Yeah,
much.
that makes me think that summer is a really good time to like reset and check in, and be like, wait, what habits have I been doing? And what do I want to, you know, get back to? And so that can carry into the fall, hopefully.
I'm having this image right now of what is my summer writing tan that I kind of want to now have when I take my computer to the pool now. So I agree with everything that everyone said, of course, because it's all great information. The two things I'm thinking about are really this issue of habits and goals. And I think that what's really difficult sometimes is that we don't even know how we want to plan. So go back to this issue of structure and flexibility. And some of us maybe are the kind of people where you want to devote a week to a paper and you get it in and you're done. Some of us, maybe you need a little more variability and variety. So you have a few hours here to something here, and it's really on you to figure out what those habits are for you. The thing though I think is most important is, borrowing from the knowledge that we have from behavioral economics, and I know Dr. Duffy, you really hit this on as well, is schedule it. Like, schedule the thing you really want to have. So if you want to make sure you are taking a break, unfortunately for many of us, you have to put in a break to schedule. You have to schedule a break. It's a goal now. And I want to also kind of take the idea that, Dr. Zumbrun, you've talked a lot about in your work around expanding the definition of what is writing. I want to expand the definition of what is an academic goal, because we should include in academic goals taking a break, because we know that taking a break is actually beneficial for then your academic progress.
So many amazing nuggets in everything that everybody just said. Once again, I know I've said this a million times, but so glad this is being recorded, because for someone like me who struggles with writing, has high anxiety surrounding summertime, this is such good information. So we've touched on, the evolution of how your summers have changed. And you've touched on this a little bit as well, but I would like maybe a little bit more detail about how you structure this. What is your typical summer schedule like? And I know we've kind of touched on that maybe a little bit more broadly.
I think the beautiful thing about summer is that I don't have a typical schedule. I go back to the days of my third year of grad school, where I was done with my comps, but I hadn't started on the dissertation proposal yet, and I could just do whatever. Just get up and read one day, or I get the inspiration to work on a paper, or I'll just go to the gym and then hang out in the garden all day. So that's what I really enjoy about summer, is that I have very few meetings that I schedule, and if I do have meetings, I try and put them all on one day. So it's like, okay, every other day I get to choose every moment what I am doing. And for me, that gives me that sense of like, okay, that freedom, and that I can actually relax into whatever I'm working on. Because I'm the kind of person, it's very hard for me to write on a schedule, to say like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to work on this paper. I can force myself to do it, but it doesn't feel as as comfortable. So that's why I say, like, there's really no typical schedule for me. I really enjoy having that flexibility.
And I would love to hear if any of our other panelists maybe feel the same way. I saw Joey shaking his head a lot.
Yeah, I think for me, summer schedule differs a lot summer to summer, and kind of, depends on what I'm doing in the summer. Some summers I do teach, take on a course. I'm doing that this summer. A couple summers ago, I did some consulting work. So what my, weekly schedule looked like was a little bit different. And then I think, as mentioned before, if you have summer salary and you're kind of paid on it through a grant, you might dedicate your time a little bit differently too. But one thing I do, so for me, just taking this summer, I tend to do a lot of my course prep and course grading and work early in the week. And then meetings with students or on projects, and items that I'm giving feedback on or kind of reviewing midweek, and then probably towards the end of the week, core writing gets the very last priority there. But it is on the schedule. So then Thursdays and Fridays are a little bit more about hopefully projects that I'm spearheading or writing that I want to do. And that is pretty fluid. It changes a lot week to week, depending on the demands. One thing I'll say I did during the academic year, a colleague of mine started a writing group. So Friday mornings, we would write together, and that has been really helpful just to have that structure. And I agree too, I can't always write, as productively or at making as much progress. I love that idea, using progress instead of productivity. I can't always do that, just set down at a certain time and have all of the creativity juices flowing and just be able to be as productive with it. But I do find it helpful to have some structure to kind of check in and see, okay, this is going to be prioritizing some form of writing, whether that's brainstorming or planning or reading some work that's hopefully going to, integrate into my writing in some form. So I think having some dedicated time during the week for me has helped kind of reprioritize that.
Yeah, I really I really like that. Joey mentioned that about redefining writing, and I really think it's an important thing that gets lost sometimes, and that I think leads itself to what gets scheduled too, and how it gets scheduled, and how we deal with the shenanigans or the things that come in between us and our writing, be those emotional, physical, and others. So really thinking about writing about loosely, very loosely. So I used to put writing on my calendar at a specific time of the day, every 5 days a week. And that changed because I started to get into the mopes when I wasn't, writing, or what I pictured of writing, of like which is really flow, right? For a lot of folks, is that like it's this dreamy space where you're just hammering out words and it's so great. Look at all the progress. And those are like really good writing days, y'all. And golly, everyone has a memory of that. And then you have perhaps several other memories that aren't so dreamy. And so, but they're part of the moving the work forward. And so I changed my calendar block to say, sometimes the project name. So I'm just like working on this project. And that's much aligned with Dr. Duffy's idea of like, on this day, I work on teaching or grading or prepping or whatnot. And then this is when I work on this project or moving this project forward, which includes so much, like often if it's a traditional research project rather, then all the things that go into really pushing that project forward, from conceptualization to implementation to dissemination. And that has helped me think about progress really in important ways.
I've also been struggling to kind of create a typical perspective view on this. So like Dr. Bird, I don't know. But what I can say is what I chose this year. And I want to go back to the comment I made earlier. This changes for me. So last summer, so different than this summer. But this summer I chose, which has been really successful so far, even though it's just the beginning of the summer. So who knows what will happen. I'm going to give myself projects that I'm giving, a week to a month on. And that's the major project. Other things will happen. That's expected. I know that that's okay. But I want to give myself the time to attend to and give attention to, and my cognition to, one thing. So I'm not all over the place, which is what I often feel in the normal academic year, kind of everywhere. So that was really important to me. But I also just want to clarify, I don't think that you should hear my words and then say, oh, that's a good suggestion. Reflect if that's meaningful to you. Maybe you're someone who really, and I'll just list like the fun organizational psych things, like you need an Eisenhower matrix. Maybe you like chunking. Maybe you like brain dumping. I don't know what the thing is that you need, but sometimes you just need to clear mental energy, or you need to clear mental space for mental energy for a project. So that was really important for me for this year. Who knows what next year will look like?
I so appreciate the transparency, guys, because I think as a grad student, sometimes we think that, especially, people who are ahead of us, they have these very elaborate, detailed schedules that they follow to a T. And what we see is that maybe that's not the reality for every individual who's in academia or who's a professional.
I've never met one, P.S. I've had a lot of academics. I've really never met someone who stays on. Like, how does that even work? It's not terribly realistic. I'm gold.
If you want, I can show you one. I don't hold to it like Dr. Zimmerman just alluded to, but I had one. It's not real.
Once again, maybe it's a myth that we all seem to have then, because I never feel quite on my stuff, and I thought surely somebody is. Maybe we're all just trying our best. So based off of your scheduling, how do you prioritize what you're doing over the summer? So, are you wrapping up old projects? Are you only starting new projects? Something along the lines of that. So how are you prioritizing all of that, all of your work?
I think for me, it's very rarely new projects. It's usually trying to make progress on an existing project or to finish up something. So for me, since I do have that, sort of long, I feel like the summer, I just have like this open time to do things. It's easier to be like, okay, I can definitely finish this paper. Whereas during the semester, it's like, I don't know, we got meetings and then ARA is coming up and all those sort of things. So what I do tend to prioritize, though, in terms of research, tend to be the papers that can get out, right? Because if it can get submitted before the end of the summer, then we'll be into the fall before I get the reviews back, and I don't have to worry about that bit of writing for a while. With research projects, those tend to be on a lower priority, unless I'm getting summer salary for them. Just because, in terms of data collection, even analysis, things can be slower because it's harder to get people together for, to actually have meetings and to do things like that. So that tends to be lower on the list, but it's at least a good time to get organized and say, like, okay, here's what I want to do. And then, that well-being part, right? Prioritizing the travel, like some folks were saying, those are the sorts of things that, like you just have a whole week where I don't have to work, right? And I don't have to cancel class and no one's going to miss me. So I do, like others said, try to make those a priority.
I think for me, it's a combination of both. I usually have some projects I'm trying to finish up, and I just find that's helpful because those are usually things that are kind of hanging over my head. And, talking about, Joy, I think you were saying like freeing up mental space for mental energy. And I think that helps me to do that. So if I can get a few projects or papers completed, and, then I feel like I have more mental space to start thinking maybe a little bit more imaginative or creatively about new ideas. And then I like to try to, even if I don't make much progress. So you might be thinking, oh, there's a grant application coming up, maybe in the summer, maybe in the fall, and you want to think a little bit about that. Or maybe you're thinking, I want to collect some data. What would be a new project? So I think it is a good time to kind of brainstorm those ideas, even if you don't fully complete them. I don't always expect new projects in the summer I'm going to complete, but that'll start creating some space to think about, or thinking about my program of research. Okay, this is what the projects I'm finishing up on. Where am I going next? And what do I want to, invest time into in the upcoming academic year? But I do find it is helpful to kind of get at least a few things knocked off your list and feel that sense of satisfaction, because I think one thing we all struggle with in academia is just, that delayed gratification because projects take so long. So I think just giving yourself that and saying, I finished that, even, if it's, I got an, analysis and a data set analyzed that I had kind of sitting there. I, helped to see this paper that needed editing or some final writing done. So there's different ways to do that, but to just give yourself some sense of goal attainment and that you've accomplished that, I think is really helpful.
I totally agree. So so a lot of my consulting is around around this topic, and I've follow kind of my own advice as much as I can with working through my own workbooks that I've created for each academic term, because I believe strongly in like, okay, let's begin again and like try again. And I think that's such a cool part about academic terms is that they kind of end and then you get to start over. And I really love I love the start over and think it's pretty special. And so I start a new, workbook and work through those goals and what both self-care goals and progress goals that I have for the summer, and keeping it in a workbook like that helps me really but helps me reflect on. It helps me be able to see how much progress I have made, because when I break down the tasks and these are the nitty gritty things and how they map across my months. And then I mean, of course they get like, okay, copy paste, this one moves over here to the next week, but I can cross them off and then the end say like, okay, well, perhaps it's not as much as I hoped, but look at all the progress I did make on these projects. And that's helpful seeing that, because it's not always visible. But I absolutely agree that I feel like no matter the term or season, I'm always prioritizing the low-hanging fruit. Like, what is closest? What are the, like, there's an R&R. You can catch me on this R&R so we can get it out of here, because I never want to see it again. And it's done. Yay. So I absolutely start with the lowest hanging fruit and because I do think that there's quite a lot of satisfaction being like, see you later, never. But
I find myself thinking a lot about, so I spoke about this thing called the Eisenhower matrix. I'm just gonna pop in the chat, a Google search for it. Essentially, it's importance orthogonal to urgency. And the reason why I like that a lot is because it helps me to prioritize what's actually important in the now. Part of what that looks like is some things have deadlines. I have a chapter due for this thing. I have a conference coming up in that thing. Another thing happened. My advisor is asking for this. A mentor is asking for that. Those things come up and those have urgency because they are, there's a timeline associated with them. I also think that, to Dr. Zembrum's point, low-hanging fruit are really important. Like, acknowledge them, use them, get there. Because there is actually, and I really appreciate this language, there's these different goals that we have. I think everyone's spoken about them generally. I've heard it referred to as a reach goal, which is the goal that you can obtain, and then a stretch goal, which is the one that's a little harder. So if you can get to the reach goal, wonderful, good, celebrate yourself. And if you can get to the stretch goal, even more impressive, how wonderful. But they're both important. And then beyond just prioritizing urgency, importance, etc., something I think a lot about is my emotions, because I'm in emotions. I do affective psychology research. What is giving me anxiety, and what do I think will be fun? If there's a project that's sitting on my plate that I know is taxing, I either need to address it or remove it, because I don't need that anxiety in my life. So I want to consider that part. Or in the fun side, if there's something that's really fun I want to do, I should do it. It's not crazy to want to enjoy the work that we do.
Which, thank you so much, Joey, for posting that resource in the chat. Also, as another highly anxious person, I've never considered guiding myself with my emotions. So maybe that's how I should start prioritizing my tasks, because I'm the exact same way. I use that a lot.
I do want to just mention, though, because there's a lot of people in the affective psychology world talk about like the emotions and communication, how you should listen to your emotions. Some emotions you should listen to, some you shouldn't. I just want to be clear for everyone on the call. Don't think that being guided by your emotions 100% is the way to go, because intrusive thoughts are attached to emotions as well. So just do some self-reflection.
We appreciate the disclaimer. But yes, I usually say I'm literally driven by like spite and adrenaline. I was going to say that's literally just my life. But I know we've touched on this as well. We've talked about your typical summer schedule. How does that differ from just a normal semester? And are there pros and cons to that you see? So I'll repeat that again. We've talked about your typical summer schedule. How does that differ from just a regular semester? And for you personally, are there pros and cons to that?
Yeah, it's very different. So for me, I feel like my semester, so I am an associate professor. I'm also the director of graduate programs for my department. So that's a 10% service role. So in addition to my teaching, I also have like administrative responsibilities and research. And so I end up in a lot of meetings that other people schedule, right? And so it's like 2 hours once a month, for this committee, and 2 hours once a month for this other thing. So I feel like when during a semester, my schedule is determined by others, and I will squeeze in, my research meetings or like the meetings with the people I like in the ways that best fit, but it still ends up being, just hours and hours in meetings. And that feels constraining to me. I'm the kind of person who it's hard for me to work between meetings. If I have 30 minutes, I don't know what to do with myself because I can't get into anything. My mind just doesn't like switch tasks very easily. And so the summer, by getting to choose what I do, by having these large blocks of time, it feels entirely different. And so that's the pro. But of course, I don't get to choose that always during a semester. This past semester, I wasn't teaching. I had my class in the fall, and I had 2 course releases this spring. So I ended up being able to have more days where it was just more self-determined. But I don't feel like I will have that once this grant runs out. So, so that's where I am.
Yeah, I think similarly, the summer brings a lot more flexibility and, just autonomy, as you were mentioning, Dr. Burgess, like more self-determined. And I think that's something that we all crave, to kind of find those opportunities. But that's, one of the big pros of the summer is I feel like you can have a lot more agency in what you're choosing to do and how you structure your time. I was even thinking like this last week, even though I was really busy with something that I wanted to work on that week, I just thought I felt very different. And I was like, I think it was just that contrast between feeling like there was always something new coming up, which it can feel like during the semester, you're adding to that plate all the time in that pile, versus I felt like I was working on the, item that I wanted to work on for a while, or I was getting one of those things that we talked about, getting that, making progress on it. And it is a great feeling, I think, especially when, so many people kind of experience burnout, and you start to say, like, where is that joy and where is that, curiosity and interest and spark? And then to kind of be reminded that you're like, oh, I really do like this. You need that space to be able to, pursue and have that agency. And so I find that kind of flexibility and being able to feel like you're not always having something pile up and more, but being able to start to say, this is what I want to spend my time on. It's a very big contrast for me, but it's always a nice reminder to realize, like, once you get into that flow state or you get into those tasks, you're like, I do really enjoy this. And I think you need that so that you can go back into the academic year too, and kind of that can help propel you forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't have a whole lot to add, honestly. Except just wanting to come back to every summer still looks different, depending on, so for instance, while I'm not teaching a class, I've got several of my doc students like deep in dissertation land. And so that's still teaching, and I want to make sure those friends are successful. And so and so making sure that those friends are successful is part of my time. And so I have to be sometimes I have more flexibility depending on the season, and it might be during the academic term, depending on what's funded and what my specific load is. But I do think I just love this time of the season. So like the beginning of it where I get to be intentional and drafting out an idea of what I want this term or this season to look like. And in considering all the things that I want to be successful, including my self-care and travel and time for creative projects and things like that. So I like the I feel like I can be intentional at no matter the season, but the summer is a special season in that there are typically for a lot of academics typically less meetings and things like that, which is ooh, thank you so much, baby Jesus. Fewer meetings for the win.
There's not much I want to add. I want to just agree with everyone, just add one thing that I'm currently doing because of everything that's been said. I'm giving myself permission to work in different locations more often. I felt that during the academic year, I have to be on campus, I have to be at this desk in this location. And tomorrow, I promise you, I won't be on the campus because I want to just give myself permission to try different places to write and work.
Which is a perfect transition to my next question, which is actually about what is your process for writing in the summer? So do you work at home? How do you plan that writing time out? How do you set those goals? Do you work with others? Do you like to work by yourself? So on and so forth. I don't want to overwhelm you, but so what is that process for you like writing in the summer? And then if you could just elaborate off of that and give us some details.
Sure. So I think the writing looks very similar to how I write during a semester. I like to write by myself. I have tried writing groups, and the only thing that works with other people is if we're on Zoom and we just go away, like you're there, I'm going to check in with you, but don't talk to me. I can't have people in the room with me. It's very distracting for me. So I just like to just be on my laptop, sometimes in my office, sometimes I'm sitting on the couch, sometimes in this office at home. But just to have that like alone time to just be like, okay, I have all my documents, I'm just gonna go and get into that flow state like someone was talking about. So that's sort of like when you actually have text to put onto the page, right? Other times the writing is finding sources, right? Or reading a bunch of articles to make sure you have a citation for something. Sometimes, if it's for like a grant proposal or something, it's like, okay, I have to go figure out like what do I actually want to do as the method for this project, right? And then I have to go like, wait, what did I do in the last project? Or, what did someone else write in their proposal? So sometimes that's more kind of like the researchy parts of writing. And I find it's more helpful to do that kind of stuff in my office because I have my 2 screens. I can just, print things out more easily. I just waste a lot of paper when I'm on campus because it's like, I'm going to print it out and just like have it laid out like this way. So that tends to be my process. When I do write with other people, I tend to say like, you take this section and I'm going to take this section and then we'll work on it. And sometimes I have some students who like to kind of do that, in the moment together. But that's been most productive for me. And it's definitely taken time to get to that point of understanding this is how I like to write and this is how I best write. I think, as a grad student and as an early career person, you have to explore a lot of different things because it might be surprising, like, oh, actually, this is what's useful for me. I used to spend a lot more time when I was a grad student writing at home. But, I started getting like carpal tunnel in my wrist because I was in this weird position, where you're kind of like, you have your mouse hand kind of in this weird place. And so learning about that and, having to go through physical therapy and all that stuff, that's made me a lot more conscious of like, okay, I bought this desk, it's the right height. If I am on my couch, then I just kind of limit how long I'm there and take breaks. So those kind of things you learn over time as you really get into things.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice. Like thinking about what works for you, what works for someone else isn't necessarily going to work as well for you. So some exploration in that. And then also like I totally agree with you on Dr. Bird on the ergonomic setup. I feel like I now have a chair that has lumbar support. And when I was in grad school, I feel like I just would work wherever, or I kind of had a terrible setup that way. But you know, when you are spending hours and you do realize, like, you know, I want my mind and body to be in good health here. Those things, I don't know, became more priority for me too. I think I do a lot of writing and work from home. For me, that's how I can maintain good work-life balance, being able to take breaks or go for those walks or do those sorts of things. If I'm in the office, I'll try to fit that in on campus too. So still trying to find time that I can take breaks as well is important. And I sort of see how I feel. So if I have writing a task or a goal in mind, and I feel like I'm being really productive working from home, great, keep going and, you know, fuel that momentum. If I realize this isn't really working for me, I'm not making as much progress, maybe I will go into the office and start to structure it more. I do also sometimes, the writing group we work from a cafe, so that's kind of nice and reminiscent of my grad school days too, because I feel like sometimes that energy of people around me is helpful, but for those, I also might have different kinds of writing tasks that I'm trying to accomplish. So, okay, I really want to work on this section, or maybe I'm going through and doing more editing on something. You know, maybe it's not all novel or generative, because that might take more quiet time for me. So I think just kind of figuring out what works for you in different spaces. If I'm in this space, this is the kind of writing task I can do. If I'm working with others, I tend to not be able to accomplish this as well, but I can do this really well. What else? Oh, a couple summers, I've also joined some writing retreats. That's a little bit, you know, different, but I found those really helpful for kind of kickstarting the summer, or giving you consistent, you know, writing time, back-to-back days, and other people that are writing with you, you know, not necessarily on the same project, but writing as well. So you can kind of say, this is where I'm stumped, or talk about your writing in a way that I don't think we always get dedicated time to do. And I think Shay asked a question. The writing retreat was sponsored with something that one of my colleagues had organized. So that was one that was kind of sponsored for faculty to go on. But I think, you know, coming up with sort of like writing retreats with friends or colleagues could also be really fun. And not having it to be such a, you know, formally organized, but being able to kind of have something where you all commit to going somewhere, or having a consecutive days where you're writing, I think could be really useful. And maybe others have done that as well too, and can speak to that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of like create your own, like a DIY writing retreat in that you bring a buddy or two, and you know, it doesn't have to be expensive or far away even. It's just that you commit to a day or a couple days in the same place together, and you think about what would be helpful for you all to make progress, thinking about how would you structure your time together. And so it's, you don't have to overthink it, like, or find it or pay a whole lot of money for it. Those things are always available. Like, sure, you can have a writing retreat in Brazil. That sounds dang dreamy to me. But you can also have a writing retreat next week for a couple of days at Panera with a couple of your grad student friends, working on just making progress, even if it's just the afternoon for a couple days. I find that, like, reflecting on what you need is, and allowing space for what you need to be different from what other people need, and that's totally okay. Writing is so idiosyncratic, and projects have a mind of their own too, and so there's just a lot of factors involved. So I just really appreciate the things that have already been said, and moving to, like, when you find like you've lost your mojo, like, I can't do it here, and thinking about like, how could you build in a treat? Is there a special cafe that sounds fun to go right at, that just a little bit of different scenery might do the trick? Can go a long way sometimes.
I find myself kind of in the same boat as Dr. Bird, where it doesn't really change that much. I like to write. I don't think I'm wonderful at it. I like to try and do it whenever I can. I think that when it comes to opportunities like the writing group that was discussed in the chat already, everyone gets together, then we all turn our cameras off and we all start writing. So kind of to Dr. Bird's point, we do the same thing. So if people want to come join us, I'm a Thursday guy. That's who I am. But I come from a philosophical tradition from the creativity theorists that when you start writing, the manuscript writes with you, like it writes itself. So I'm a firm believer that even though my writing hasn't changed, once again, I come from this perspective that you have to be flexible, because if I hold more of a rigid approach to my writing, then it won't be as successful because the thing does not want to be written that way, right? I know that's a little more philosophical, but that's really one of the ways I view my writing. And in that way, I'm a big believer of write when I can, write when I want to. And because of this autonomy and flexibility and agency that's been discussed throughout, write as often as I can as well, right? That I think has become the most important thing. So to answer more directly, it hasn't changed. I just give myself more opportunities to try it out when I can.
And we appreciate the many ways that you are able to do that. And hopefully, some of us can try these strategies as we're beginning our writing for the summer. I know I definitely will be. I have a 2,500 word submission I need to work on. So I'm going to try all of these strategies. Surely one will work. So our next question looks at opportunities that are typically during the summer. So are there any opportunities that you find are common in the summer outside of internships, since those tend to be the ones people are a little bit more aware of? And that can be as an academic, as a graduate student, either. So, are there any opportunities you find are more common in the summer outside of internships?
Well, if y'all don't know about ICPSR at the University of Michigan, they offer summer courses in mostly statistics and some other research methods as well. So those are really great courses to be able to take. It's like, I think I don't know if they're in person or virtual after the pandemic, but it's like 3 weeks of really intense instruction. And it can be a great way to, learn a new technique or to brush up on something, especially if you're going to be like using it for your dissertation or something like that. And they do have scholarships available. So if you can't, convince someone to give you $4,000, then they do have scholarships. So that's the main thing that comes to mind. I think that you really just have to look within your college or within your university to see if, because the thing that happens is sometimes they end up with extra money. And so they're like, oh, let's do an initiative. Like we had this last 2 years, we have a part-time student, like summer research fund. So it's like people getting paid to do research, but it's like, they announce it 3 weeks before the deadline. Then all of a sudden you have to just know that it's happening. So I think keep your eyes open for opportunities.
I don't have much to add to that. I will maybe, Shay, this is a good chance for you to plug your education research group. And I think you guys are you doing writing like a journal club or something like that?
Yeah, we have a writing group at University of South Carolina for anyone studying education research. So we do it like psychology. I'm starting to think of the other departments, speech pathology. We have a few different interdisciplinary areas, but if anyone's interested, we have it both over Zoom and in person. It is right now Tuesdays from 1 to 3. I'd be happy to share the link with anyone if they want another accountability group.
Thank you, Shay. We would really appreciate that.
I love the explicitness of like just ask, like people, they're running out of time to use their money, and universities are weird, y'all, with their budgets. And so if you can find out when write this down, end of the fiscal year is an important term. There, to Dr. Bird's suggestion of like, okay, what funds do we have left left, or just reaching out to the office or School of Graduate Studies or the Graduate School of some to see like what opportunities, or the often you might check out what are the opportunities available for faculty, and then asking your like through like the faculty development provost or office or whatnot at your institution. If you find something available to faculty, ask your advisor if they might ask whomever if you could go, or sometimes they do allow that. And if they don't, then you know of a topic to suggest to said graduate school or your program or whatnot, of something they could hold for a professional development opportunity for graduate students. I think those are you kind of have to search for them, and they're often, like has been said, institution specific.
I don't have a lot to offer because I'm still new to all this. I'm just a grad student. But I will say the one thing I have noticed at my university, and I'm sure is true for other institutions as well, if you're someone who is really interested in teacher professional development, this is the time it often happens. So if you want to identify or find opportunities for you at your institution where you can jump into a project, that's a really useful thing. I know that's one of the things that I've done. I found myself really enjoying Teacher PD. We do one at Temple University during July, weirdly, but it's in July. And it's been actually a very generative space for both my research, but also the viewpoints I bring to the team.
Thank you all. And I will go off of the point of just trying to figure out when that fiscal year is. If you have a purchasing department at your university, they'll definitely know when that is. I worked at UK's last summer, and literally our department went crazy right before the end of the fiscal year. But there were a lot of departments that had those leftover funds, as people have said. So I think that's a really good thing to be aware of, is that end of year date. So I think this is our last set question, but if there are any audience questions, we can definitely address those after this one. I have not been minding the chat as I should have, so we can definitely come back to there for any of those audience questions after this. So why is making summertime productive important? So like, why is this even important at all? And if we don't want to use the word productive, we can maybe say, why is it important to make progress in the summer? Since I know we've been going with progress this meeting a little bit over that productivity.
Well, I think actually this conversation has made me think that maybe it's not as important to make progress over the summer. Maybe it's important to take care of yourself and to reset and to remember that you are a person and not just a part of the academic machine. So, I mean, unless you have your dissertation that's due, in November, you might be able to just take some time and like not feel the pressure to make as much progress as you might during the semester.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Just giving yourself some grace too, that, there is more to you than just your academic career and what you publish and those things, elements, especially when we're studying like human behavior and psychology and how people learn and think. I do think we need to kind of reconnect with that and not lose sight of that. And it's, something that we all kind of care deeply about, but then sometimes we forget about that, myself included, that self-care piece and just setting time to recharge and reset. And I find that helps with my thinking and the way I approach problems or concepts or coming up with ideas if I give myself some of that time too. But I will say that I do appreciate the summer for having less distractions so that you can, think a little bit more creatively or, reprioritize and be able to, be more intentional in the upcoming year, or just even decide what the next pathway is. But I think it's also completely reasonable that this isn't something you figure out every summer and it looks exactly the same. Maybe for some people it does, but I think for me, it's a process of also seeing where I am in my life at that point in time, where you are in your career, how your academic year has been, and what your needs are, and then being ready to kind of adapt and evolve and figure out what works for you, and maybe what used to work for you but doesn't work as well, and you've got to pivot a little bit. So yeah, somewhere in between.
I really don't have anything to add, just retweet what they said, that it's very much about defining how you're going to be peaceful and make progress in the summer. Ideally every academic season, but it's about being intentional. And I think there's more room to be intentional in the summer.
I'm coming from the perspective that if we're using all of our language over the, an aggregate of what we've been talking about, progress is important because it does move these needles, balls, etc. That's important to acknowledge. And at times we need, it's incumbent upon us to identify what those are, where they are, how to do it. And if we know that there's more agency and autonomy in spaces of the summer, then if we want to support ourselves, a future self, to have to deal with something, the summer can be a good time. But I don't want to disagree with anyone. In fact, what I wanted to say instead is hone in on the word important. What is actually important? And if the important thing to you is self-care, giving yourself time, finding spaces of creativity, then do the thing that's important. So why is making summertime or progress during summertime important? Figure out what's important to you, and then you can answer your own question.
I'm loving the philosophical aspect, Joey. You're giving us a lot to think of, especially for that last question. So that, as I said, that was the last set question that we have. Have any of the graduate student committee members potentially been watching the chat? Do we have any audience questions? We do have some time if anybody would like to ask anything from the audience that you've not asked already.
I think the
I am
chat's
trying to
okay
scroll. Oh,
right now. I think the chat's okay right now, but if anyone wants to put any questions in.
and thank you for that, Shay. So any lingering questions for our panelists before we move on to the next section of the meeting? All right, so I'll move on, but if I do see something pop up, I'll try to come back to it quickly. So thank you all once again for taking the time to answer all of our questions. As we close this academic year, we just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists and the Mote SIG GSC members. We will continue to have a writing group over the summer on Tuesday evenings and Thursday mornings. There will not be a facilitator to allow the graduate student committee members time to rest, but the space will be open to write in community. So the links to register are being dropped in the chat right now, and Corey has just put those in. So as we close, I do want to thank our panelists for their insightful and enriching conversation. And thank you to everyone who joined us. And we hope to see you all soon in the fall or through those writing group meetings we have in the summer. So thank you all again and have a great evening.